Now, okay, so let's talk about those skill positions a little bit more now. You mentioned the wide receivers. Who's the odd man out here? You're talking about J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Greg Ward, Travis Fulgham, all these guys when Quez Watkins, Jalen Reagor, as well as Devontae Smith seem to be turning heads. Who do you think is going to be the guy that's going to be left off this roster?
Yeah, so, I think Quez, Devontae, Reagor, I'd say they're really only the three locks. I think Greg Ward is going to make the team because he's a solid option. He can play special teams, so I think he's going to be in. Travis Fulgham, again, I would have him on my 53-man roster projection right now, but he hasn't had a great training camp, and he had a good practice against the Jets this week, but the Jets don't have the best defensive backs in the world, so I don't know how to read into that too much, but he's kind of been disappointing. And look, you're seeing it. He's playing late into preseason games like he was last week. And then you have JJ. I don't think JJ has done enough to really make this team, but I wonder with the GM being in charge of roster decisions and Howie Roseman, they might just keep him around anyway. Wide receiver could kind of be a position they look at in terms of waivers because, the Eagles are a little bit higher than they usually are in seasons past. They have the 6th overall spot in the waiver claim, same as the draft order. So they could look to attack that. They might keep some guys like a JJ or a Fulgham at first and might cut them a couple days later if they get someone they like on waivers. And another name I'll throw in here who can kind of make this interesting is Andre Patton, who came into training camp just like everyone thought he was going to be just a camp body because the Eagles had some wide receiver injuries. He's almost had the summer last year that Travis Fulgham did in terms of coming in here out of nowhere and kind of making some nice catches, not doing anything super sensational, but kind of just being a really solid guy. And obviously he has some background on Nick Sirianni, so I would keep an eye on him.
Okay, there's one name that at one point in the preseason it made me like he brought me excitement, and that was Miles Sanders. And the only time that he's done that is when he talked about using the screen game more under Nick Sirianni than they did under Doug Peterson and featuring the running back maybe a little bit more than they did it under Doug Peterson. But as far as everything else goes, his play, all I read about with Miles Sanders is there's drops. He's dropping the football. He can't run the screen game because he can't catch the football. At what point do we get concerned about him going into the season and start getting excited about Kenny Gainwell, for instance?
It's a big concern. Miles Sanders led the NFL in drops last year for running backs, and I believe he led the Eagles as a team in drops. So it's a real concern. He's had, I'd say, at least 5 or so in training camp, which is like a decent amount. Again, he led the NFL last year with 8. So that's a significant number. Now, he's coming off a practice against the Jets on Wednesday, where he had a productive day in the passing game. So that's a good sign to see, maybe ending camp on a strong note. But there have been drops in there. And also, along the lines of Wednesday's practice against the Jets, Kenny Gainwell was in there with the ones a decent amount and getting looks as a passing target. So I don't think it's like Miles Sanders is, penciled in for this huge role in terms of running the ball and catching the ball. He's going to have a big role running the ball, and I think he still looks great as ever in that regard. But again, for you to kind of be on the field like a lot more, you're going to have to show it in the passing game too. And to me, there's still a lot of concerns there.
To flip it on the defensive side of things, I have really liked what I've seen so far from Milton Williams, the rookie defensive end. I love what I'm seeing from him so far, as a matter of fact. It seems like he's always being able to push his guy back. Not necessarily roller skates just yet, but he seems like he's able to gain an edge as an edge rusher for the Eagles. What do you make of him so far throughout training camp in the preseason?
He's been a big surprise in the sense of, the Eagles draft him. We all see him listed at defensive tackle. We figure, okay, he's going to play defensive tackle. But really, he's been between positions, and I think his biggest highlights have come at defensive end. So that was unexpected, especially because, too, you look at what the Eagles already have at defensive end. You're talking about Josh Sweat, who's had one of the best camps of anyone on the team. I thought Derek Barnett, before he kind of has been banged up recently with a shoulder injury, was having a good camp too. Not as good as Josh Sweat's, but still a pretty good one. Obviously Brandon Graham is starting, and then Ryan Kerrigan has been banged up, but he should be back soon, coming off a thumb surgery. So that's a pretty, deep top 4 already. And then you add Milton Williams somewhere in there. I think he's going to bounce back and forth between defensive end and defensive tackle. But yeah, he's really impressed me. A big reason why the Eagles drafted him was how athletic he is. And you kind of see that explosion, or at least we've seen that so far. Really big game last week when he was able to force 2 holding penalties, didn't get the sacks, but just to kind of have that impact out of the gate, I think he's going to be a nice little rotational player for them.
I remember talking to Chris Long the Super Bowl year and asking him, who on the defensive line do you think is really going to step up and be something special? And he said Josh Sweat. And it seems like every year somebody mentions Josh Sweat as the guy that's going to either break out or turn heads or take that big step forward. And now I'm seeing it more so than ever right now. Do you think Josh Sweat will be one of those guys that steps up and kind of takes the reins?
I really do, just because he's dominated in training camp. And now part of his success has been because he's been going up against Andre Dillard, but it's not only that. You know, he's been very dominant. He makes plays every single day. Him and honestly Javon Hargrave. I have to mention Javon Hargrave in here because he has been also just really consistently dominant. These guys are like living in the backfield. They're just causing disruption on not necessarily every play, but a lot of plays. So yeah, I'm very bullish on both of those two players this year.
I got to tell you, Brandon, I don't know about you, but when I look for a first-round pick, I look for an offensive lineman that will be a morale booster for my defensive ends. That's what I look for every single time. Now, here's the thing. I've been hearing this all the time. Apparently, the joint practices are just as good as preseason games because I didn't even know it. I thought the Eagles were having less preseason games this year with 3. Turns out that they had 7. I didn't even know that. First off, I kind of half joked about this on the show yesterday, saying that the Players Association then needs to charge more money for having joint practices. Well, charge money for having joint practices. I got to play Jalen Hurts. I got to play some members of the offensive line going into the final preseason game to at least break up what would be a month between snaps and only getting 2 series in the preseason to playing in the regular season. Where do you stand on joint practices versus preseason, and where do you stand on the starters actually playing in the finale on Friday?
I think it's a good approach to have the joint training camp practices. I think there's a lot of value in them. I think they should do both. I think it's not like we need to eliminate one or the other. I think the model should be, I mean, it's not ideal for people who are paying tickets, obviously, and everything. But in terms of team success, if we're looking at it from that perspective, not an entertainment perspective, I think it makes the most sense for the teams to have these joint training camp practices and then limit the preseason playing time to a couple series or 2, kind of like we saw in the Steelers game. I think that makes the most sense because you're trying to cut down on the injuries. And hey, look at what the Eagles have done this summer in terms of avoiding injuries, like knock on wood here. But they haven't had any, at least really big ones. I mean, Jason Kroom got hurt in the preseason last year. He's out for the season, but that guy probably wasn't going to make the team anyway. So yeah, I think it's hard to kind of criticize the approach that's been taken here in terms of the results. They've been healthier. Last year, this time, I think they were missing like 7 or so starters heading into week 1. So it's made a big difference. So I think it's interesting to see what they can get out of these joint training camp practices. And I agree with you in terms of, I think we need to see Jalen Hurts not play a whole half. I don't need to see that. I would like to see a series or 2, get him in there. And again, it's a long layoff. It's the extra layoff this year. And yeah, I think there's some value in playing him.